All right, let's start then. First of all, thank you, Julian, for this initiative. I found it really interesting. Well, I as soon as I saw the call for speaker, I started thinking on how to participate based on some of my experience related to SQL Server, Azure SQL Data Platform, and the certification. So I decided to prepare this session so we can all share this and just comment to you what was my journey on transitioning from SQL to Azure Data Certification, right? Speaking with several friends and colleagues from the community, I found this like quite common pattern on this transitioning. So that is why I truly believe this could be quite useful. I'm going to share some contents related to the original exams and certifications, the new ones, the changes, and the evolution of the whole certification program, specifically for data, right? I'm a SQL Server professional, so everything that I'm going to be talking about here will be related to SQL, Azure SQL, and Data Platform. So, again, thank you, Julian, and let's start. A little bit about myself. My name is Javier Villegas. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I work at Mediterranean Shipping Company as IT director in DBA and BI operations. I have experience with the SQL Server, been working for over 25 years, and recently also with Azure SQL and the whole data platform portfolio. I am Microsoft MVP in the data platform category since 2016. I'm also Microsoft certified trainer. I define myself also as a technical speaker. I love to get involved in different community events. I, of course, miss a lot the in-person events, but this possibility of being in our desk just talking about technology on a Saturday in front of our computer is also really valuable in these times, right? I'm also a member of the SQL Argentina community. I'm one of the organizers. We have our meetup, our events, etc. So for the one who speak in Spanish, you are more than welcome to join us. On the left side of the slide, you will see my contact information, LinkedIn, Twitter, my blog, and my email address. Feel free to reach me at any time if you have any questions regarding to this presentation or any other thing that you would like to talk about or discuss, or only if you want to connect. I'm more than happy to connect and network with the communities. So this is a little bit the new, let's say, experience coming from Microsoft, right? You all know that Microsoft and the technology has evolved in the last several years, and several things are target to cloud computing, right? And SQL Server is not the exception, right? Been working with SQL Server for this many years. I've seen a bunch of things, right? Initially working with SQL Server on Windows Server, and probably at no time I can imagine SQL Server running on Linux, right? And since SQL Server 2017 is also running in Linux, containers, virtual machines. Back then, I remember just telling to my colleagues, I don't want SQL Server running on a VM. I just want it run it on my physical server close to me just generating heat, right? And using a lot of power. So all that has changed, has evolved a lot in different product and services, right? So in the cloud, SQL Server has a bunch of offerings and options. We won't be talking about them today, but just for you to know. I remember something that was quite important to me several years ago when the whole cloud era started. In several sessions, speaking in front of a bunch of people, asking me, okay, so this cloud thing is huge, but are we, the DBA, going to lose our jobs because of this? Because we are just giving everything to Microsoft. There are some features and some things like automatic backup, automatic tuning, and other things. So are we going to be, having to consider another approach for our career? And my answers back then was absolutely not. And many years after, I can guarantee that answer was accurate, right? Of course, you cannot stay like being only an expert doing SQL backups on only running Profiler, right? There are many other things like, as I said, the technology has evolved a lot. So we as professionals has to evolve as well, right? And one of the, let's say, tools that we have to learn, understand, and validate our knowledge and our working experience are the Microsoft certification. They are around since a ton of years, right? And they have evolved as well. And they have evolved drastically in certain areas. So let's see some of the cases, and let's start digging on how this has changed. So this is a little bit about my profile related to Azure, to SQL and Azure Data exams and certification. So in this journey, we'll see how this has evolved. Back then in 2003 and 2012, the certification was Microsoft Certified Professional. You had to pass one exam, initially SQL Server 2000, then 2005, and so on, right? Then the whole portfolio has changed with, I believe it was more like a naming change, but also trying to be at the top of the wave with the technology innovation back then, right? In 2017, there was this Microsoft Certified Technology Specialist, in where you just have to pass one exam and you had this recognition, right? Back then was SQL Server 2005. When Microsoft released SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2, they also started to diversify the exams to get different certification. We're going to see some of the examples later on, but back then you start have the different approaches, like, okay, you want to be an expert on T-SQL, on SQL Server, administration, performance monitor and troubleshooting, or BI specialist, right? So that was the first approach to have different paths within the same certification. Then Microsoft Certified Technology Specialist certifications were there also for SQL Server 2012, 2014, and 2016, right? And, in 2016, SQL Server 2016 time was when Microsoft started approaching to this new Microsoft Azure role-based certification, right? You have seen that these are, there are a lot of these certifications available, but in the area of data, we will cover 3 of them, right? The one related to data fundamentals, the one more target to SQL Server DBA that now is more based on Azure SQL, but not only SQL Server. We will see that there are some questions, maybe not all of them, based on managed instance or Azure SQL as well. So this is the whole offering that Microsoft has in the cloud, right? SQL Server running in virtual machines, the same one that we've been running on-premise for years, and then the platform as a service offering Azure SQL database and managed instance. So then we had Azure Data Fundamentals, famous DP 900, and administering relational databases on Microsoft Azure DP 300. If you see these 2 certifications, there is no word mentioning SQL or SQL Server. Now is data and Azure Data. Back then, you had different products. You were specialists on analysis services, Microsoft SQL Server, reporting services, and many other things. When Microsoft started investing in the cloud computing, back then they have put, at least for the data area, they had a new umbrella covering all the data technology, which was data platform, in where it's not covering only SQL, it's also covering NoSQL, big data, BI, and analytics, right? So in that umbrella, one of the key pieces, of course, is SQL Server, but it's not the only one. These were, the exams in where, you will see the evolution of the certification and the exams itself. At the beginning, in the early years, all of them were mentioning SQL Server. See the last one, which is actually the oldest one, installing, configuring, and administering Microsoft SQL Server 2000 Enterprise Edition, right? It was really targeted to a specific product and on how to install, configure, and administer it, right? Really, really specific. Then, that get a little bit more wider. The other one is SQL Server 2005 implementation and maintenance, right? Both of them combined were also part of certification back then. All these, the one from the bottom, are basically targeted to DBA, right? And a database administrator, which is my role, which was my role back then. Then you will see that there is administering SQL database infrastructure, right? So, the name of the exam of the certification also were implying and still implying that it's not only one product and one feature, is getting more wider in terms of usage and availability, right? And then, Microsoft Azure Data Fundamentals and administering relational databases on Microsoft Azure. These are the common learning transitioning from SQL certification to Azure Data, right? We'll see some caveats on this journey. Also in the certification panel, you also have the active certifications. And something that is really important to mention is that at this moment, with the role-based Azure certification, they have an expiration day, right? So they are 2 years. So you have the certification for 2 years, and then you have to validate certification once again with another exam. Something that is extremely to me useful, and I see it all the time, and I believe you do too, is that every few months Microsoft is adjusting, tuning, and evolving the new Azure role-based certification. In the data area, you will see in the main page, right, in the website, that which are the topics that are being updated. You also see it in the technology, right? These days, Microsoft is releasing new features every couple of milliseconds. So it doesn't make sense to have an exam which was 3-4 years old, covering very basic things or things that have evolved a lot. In the SQL Server area, with Azure SQL, Microsoft is focusing all the new features and innovation to the Azure SQL database and managed instance, and then they port these features back to the product, right? So if the services and the products are evolving constantly, it makes a lot of sense also to have update the exams to follow this path, right? This was something that, several years ago was not the case. The exam was released. Maybe there were some few tunings in 1 or 2 questions, but now the exams itself are evolving quite fast. Also, something really interesting that you will see is that there are certain exams that allow you to drive to one certification directly, or maybe a set of exams driving to another set of certification. In the data area, you have Azure Data Fundamentals, DP 900, right? Then we saw before the ones related to Azure Fundamentals, AC 900, AI Fundamentals, Power Platform. So each of the areas had their fundamentals exam, which is kind of the entry point to get into the certifications and the exams, right? They are covering kind of basic stuff, but believe me, the exams are quite well done in order to cover almost 100% of the points that they are promoting that they're going to be evaluating, right? So definitely, if you would like to start and get involved with the new Azure Data certification, DP 900 is the first one that you should be targeting. If you are coming from a SQL Server database administration, high availability, disaster recovery, performance tuning, backups, and those kind of things that we're going to be reviewing in a few minutes, right? The one that you should be focusing is in this DP 300, right? Which will drive you to get the Azure Database Administrator certification. That is the exam that we're going to be covering more deeply in this presentation. Both the DP 900 and the DP 300 are really recent certifications and exams, right? They have no more than a year and a half old. So definitely these are new certifications available in the market, right? Based on this certification and also, providing some, let's say, if you deliver training for this certifications. You can also get the other certification, which is more targeted to trainers, right? Microsoft certified trainers, which are also valid for 1 year period, right? In where you have to revalidate it, right? And then you saw the other ones, the one at the bottom, which are basically specific exams that were passed in the past, right? It's just for the exam itself, not for the certification. So let's try to understand a little bit this switch from SQL to Azure Data certification. If we go to the Microsoft webpage, in where we have all the exams and certification details, right? We see here the 764 administering a SQL database infrastructure. This exam was basically the first one that was also covering some points related to Azure SQL database, right? Not only SQL Server, but also there were some areas pointing to SQL database, Azure SQL database, right? As you can see, the exam was retired early this year, so it's no longer available for you to book it or get the exam, right? So it's completely expired, so there is no more options to take it. Some of the points that were pointed here, right, and we're going to see it in detail here, is again pointing to SQL Server, data access and auditing, and also you see the percentage of the overall exam that was focusing on these topics: encryption, data access and permission, auditing, right? Then another important point for every single DBA is how to manage backup restore, and then we're going to get into the high availability and disaster recovery, right? How to have a backup strategy, how to restore and validate that those backups are correctly, database integrity, right? And something, if you see also the percentage between 35 and 40% of the overall exam was on managing and monitoring SQL Server instances, like activity, how to monitor queries and indexes, how to manage statistics, and how to monitor the overall SQL Server instances. Another important point, as was mentioned earlier, was how to manage high availability and disaster recovery. Extremely important for SQL Server DBA, right? I always define a DBA role like, we have to make sure that the SQL Server environment runs well, and by well, I mention securely, right? Highly available, faster, and all the time, right? So, and those are the points that are covered here in this all exam, right? This is the gut of the certification. We will see that, the exam and the certification has evolved, but these few topics, right, are still valid also in the Azure platform, right? Even if you have SQL Server on VM, Azure SQL DB, or managed instance, you have to make it highly available, performant, right, secure, right, and running all the time. So in the high availability and disaster recovery area, we have log shipping, availability groups, and failover clusters, right? I was focusing here on the SQL Server DBA role back then, but I mentioned that there were also some variation, or not variation, different, let's say, path, right? For one of them was Microsoft Business Intelligence. And here we have some of the exams that we used to have back then in the SQL 2016 times, right? In order to achieve the Microsoft Certified System Engineer, right? Something that was really common, useful, and difficult to get many years ago. Now, is deprecated or is gone, right? But you see that in order to get this certification from the different paths, you had to cover different exams, right? If we go to the top part of the screen, we will see that, one of the paths was focusing on query, administration, and data warehouse, right? Then for a developer, it had more sense like to have query and developing SQL Server databases to get the Microsoft Certified Associate on database developer. Then for the administration point of view, we used to have 764, the one which is covered, right, administering SQL database infrastructure, and also 765, right, provisioning SQL Server databases. This one was, as I said, the very first one that was covering also Azure SQL. Then more pointing to the BI area, right? 767, implementing SQL Server Data Warehouse, and development SQL data models, right? And finally, and one of the most recent, but it's also in the process of being replaced, there was pointing to visualizations or Power BI and visualizing data with Excel, right? All of these were getting the Microsoft Certified System Engineer on data management and analytics. Again, this was coming from I will say, not the old certification and definitely not the new ones, but was an approach that was happening in the middle, in the transition process, right? When at the same time that Microsoft was implementing and doing more effort related to Azure. So now this path has evolved into something like this. If you see here, I'm focusing on two paths, right? Azure Database Administrator, the one that we're going to be covering more in depth. But also there is another one which is more targeted to data engineering, right? If you see something in common in both of these paths, the first exam that we have at the top is the DP 900, right? The Azure Data Fundamentals. In both cases, right, it is mentioning that it's optional. It's not a requisite to get the associate certification, the associate degree, to have those exams approved, right? As I said at the beginning, I truly believe that either if you go to the data area or any other data or other area that you would like to cover in terms of certification, I don't know, developers, AI, as we said earlier, the very first approach we have to take, all the professionals that like to get into this, is the fundamentals, right? And I really notice that it's quite useful to get into more details later. So then, to get the Azure Data Administrator certification, we have the DP 300, right? The one that we will cover, as I said. And then here there is something in particular for the other part, data engineering, right? Before we had to take two exams, right? DP 200 and 201. Azure Data Solutions, implementing Azure Data Solution and designing Azure Data Solution. These ones are not only focusing on SQL Server. I will say that is almost nothing related to SQL Server. This is covering more the engineering point of view with the different product and services like Synapse Analytics, Databricks, Data Factory, data lakes, right? But those two exams allow you to measure your skills on how to design this solution and how to put in place or implement one of them, right? And there is something really useful and graphically in this particular that I want to remark. This certification, the data engineering, is evolving, right? So the exams 200 and 201 are, if I remember correctly, they are still available, right? But not for long. And there is a new one called DP 203, right? Which is data engineering on Microsoft Azure. This is one of the examples that Microsoft is evolving on the certification area, right? 200 and 201 definitely are not old exams that were in the market, but they are completely getting replaced by a new one. And I really find this quite interesting because it shows you that it's not only just changing one or two questions or adjusting based on one particular technology. It's just replacing the overall approach for the exam, right? I mean, definitely passing one exam, from my experience, to get or achieve one certification is easier than pass two, basically because you have to prepare and get the stress and the whole thing for two different ones, right? But believe me, the new one is quite, covering the overall solution. And I believe it makes more sense to have only one exam to accomplish the certification, not like in the past. Note something here that the exam is in beta, right? So, and this is something that we will try to cover a little bit deeper later on when we're going to be discussing about resources, etc. Something that is quite important is Microsoft gives to the community the possibility to evaluate these new exams, right? In where you can, let's say, provide some feedback regarding to the questions, etc., and work with Microsoft on adjusting this for get the exam really valuable for the overall professional community. Now, let's focus again on DP 300. As I said, this exam has less than a year old, right? And if you can see at the top of it, it's saying that the content was updated on January 27, right? So now in the main Azure certification webpage, is telling you when they will be updating it or when was updated the last time, right? And if we read here, we're gonna see it in more detail in upcoming slide, right? It's not mentioning SQL Server much. It's also focuses on Azure Data Services and SQL Server, right? Is when it mentioned Azure Data Services is the overall Azure SQL family, right? The page gives you a bunch of resources and guidelines on how to get deep and how to get trained or prepare for self-based training or instructor-led training, and also give you the possibility of getting some places to go and buy exams to practice beforehand. This is DP 300. Going back to DP 900, right? This is also interesting. See here, the content of this exam will be updated on April 23rd, 2021. Again, this exam is really recent, and in few days it will be updated. As we said before, Azure is adding new stuff and updating stuff quite often, right? So they are also reflecting those changes in the certification, which makes a lot of sense. And finally, the Azure Data Engineer Associate, right? And at the very top, we have what we just covered before. The new exam DP 203 is replacing the DP 200 and 201, and this one will be retired on June 30. So if today you want to get the Azure Data Engineering certification, you still have the possibility of passing the 200 and 201 exams. There are also training available in this area, right? But you can also focusing on go directly to the DP 203, right? The one that is that was released as beta in February 23rd. How do we get access to this beta? This is something that some of them are available to everybody. So you just go to the page, you look for this exam, you book the exam, and the interesting thing is that is not the final price. It's much cheaper than the final exam, right? But you have to pass, you have to do the exam, and you won't, at the end of the exam, you will have a section in where you have to provide feedback about the different questions, etc. And you won't get the result of the exam. You won't know if you pass it or not until the exam get out of beta and become GA to everybody. That will be around June, July timeframe. So you pay less to access the exam. You have the possibility to provide feedback about the exam itself, and you're gonna get the results in few months, right? The interesting thing is that if you pass the exam, you definitely get the full certification. Doesn't matter if the exam was beta or not, right? Of course, this new certification, as we mentioned earlier, they are valid for a certain period of time. So in the future, you have to revalidate it, either taking again this exam or another version that may be in 1-2 years period, it can be adjusted or changed. So this is what I wanted to focus on this particular certification path. Right? This is, by the way, the one that I'm working on right now to pass. I find it really interesting area because again, it's allow you to having a SQL, let's say, background, go deeper into other technologies, and at the end of the day, prepare or deliver and maintain and support an overall Azure Data solution. Okay, so going back to the DP 300, which is the one that we will try to focus deeper from now on, right? We will cover all the points that you have to prepare in order to pass the exam. You will see that at the bottom of the screen there is a QR code. Don't worry, we will keep that code for several slides. And basically what I'm providing you in this link is an entry in my blog in where you have all this, right? But each of the point has a link to the Microsoft official documentation in order for you to understand, train, and practice this particular feature, right? So here I'm only specifying the titles. In my blog, it's also having the link for you to go and explore deeper on each of these points. So, plant and implement the data platform resources, right? It's covering between 15 and 20%. So, deploy resources using manual methods, recommend an appropriate database offering based on a specific requirement. You heard what I'm saying, right? It's not go and do a backup or high availability, at least now. It's also covering something more wider, right? How to recommend an appropriate database offering based on a specific requirement. That is why, I seem really passionate, because it's much wider than what it used to be. Configure resources for scale and performance, right? Definitely, this is something that is common from what it used to have. But now, if you see, it's also including Azure SQL Database, Elastic Pool, Managed Instance, and SQL Server running on virtual machines. Right? On this topic, also evaluate a strategy for moving to Azure. So those are the migration from on-prem to Azure, right? And implement a migration or upgrade strategy for moving to Azure. Again, all these points are really covered in deep in the documentation, and I will provide additional learning resource at the end of the presentation. You will find it really interesting. So still, security, a big point, right? Implement a secure environment. The security that we have on-prem is different than what we have to deploy in Azure, but at the end of the day, is the whole thing, is the same thing, security, right? We have to provide a secure environment for the data, the communications, the backup, etc. So how to interact with authentication, how to configure the authentication, implement security for data at rest with different technologies like transparent data encryption or dynamic data masking. And also you see something important here, Azure Key Vault and this encryption for Azure VM, right? Definitely we have more things to cover, but this is, again, the platform is much richer and wider than just having one SQL Server out of the box. Implement security for data in transit, right? Always encrypt, data gateway, and implement compliance control for sensitive data, the whole vulnerability assessment area. Monitor and optimize operational resources. I would say that the title is quite similar than what we used to have, but the content is quite different. Monitor activity and performance, right? Not only with this SQL Server tools that we used to have, like Activity Monitor, Performance Monitor, Profiler, right? But also with the new Azure Monitor or SQL Insight tools that we have available right now. In the performance area, configure and implement performance like, indexes, statistics, and maintenance. Those things are still super important, right? Identify performance-related issues, configure the resources, configure a user database for user performance, for optimal performance, optimize query performance. Still, really things that we have to focus as the DBA point of view, right? But not only in the SQL area, but now in the Azure SQL family. Review query plans, evaluate performance improvement, review database table and indexes design, and then in perform automation tasks like create a scheduled task, evaluate and implement an alert, and manage and automate tasks in Azure, which is quite completely different to what we used to know. Again, plan and implement high availability and disaster recovery, right? How to do the whole HADR solution in hybrid environment, in cloud-only environment, in infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, etc. Also, focus on backup and restore, of course, right? And configure DR by using the database tools like high availability with the always on, and also another component called Azure Site Recovery, right? Performance administration using T-SQL is still a valid point. Basically, how to use the dynamic management views, the DBCC commands, right? How to check the health, how to monitor, and how to do the backups and restore, everything using T-SQL, right? Manage authentication using T-SQL and manage authorization using T-SQL. So here is the summary of the main point and each of the percentage that is covered or let's say the weight of each of the main topic within the exam is covering everything. Believe me, it's really complete and it's covering from zero to everything, right? Of course, when you go and do the exam, there are certain number of questions that are there for you to answer. They will cover definitely all these topics, right? But depending on the exam that you're doing, it could be more focused in one or the other. But definitely you have to walk through all these points, which is, I mean, from my point of view, it kind of makes sense a lot. So, in a summary, how you do to prepare, or what you need in order to achieve this DP300 certification. From my point of view, is working experience. So I definitely believe that in order to get into this certification and do the exam and find it reasonable and eventually easy, right? You have to work with the whole Azure SQL family, and at some point of your career, create a DR, an HADR solution. Make sure that you tune queries, do the backups, know the dynamic management view. So if you have working experience with this, I will say you already cover a good way on the certification. Maybe you are not an expert on everything, right? But at least you know the whole thing. Once in the past you work with SQL replication or log shipping, or create the maintenance task, etc. Right? I believe this is quite important. Then training. If you have the possibility, there are a bunch of training. Some of them, most of them today are free of charge. So in front of your computer, you can go through a whole preparation, and you also have the instructor-led and the different sessions like this from the community, right? Learning material, we're gonna go deeper into this in just a moment, right? Practice, right? If you have the possibility of practice those exams, so you know which kind of questions and the kind of question you're going to be in front of is always a step ahead from when you are in the front of your real exam. And test, do the test, right? So go there, sign in for the exam, and if you never had the experience before, let me tell you that is something really I like to be in front of these exams because, again, it's allow you to validate and show to the world, the community, that okay, you achieve this and you have certain background on how to perform this task. So let's go deeper to the learning materials. And the ones that I really find extremely useful and I will do some comments from some of them. First of all, the Microsoft Learn portal is extremely useful, not only for data, but also for the other categories, right? But let's stick again to data, right? You will find all the necessary resources for you to learn, read, watch videos, and practice, right? So maybe it's not focusing directly on how to pass the exam, but at least you're going to be covering all the topics, right? Extremely important. You will see the Learn portal, the Microsoft Doc, right? All the documentation, in the Microsoft Doc site is extremely useful. The link, the QR code that I present earlier are all links pointing to the official Microsoft documentation for every single point that is covering into the exam. And if you are more like a visual person, you have Learn TV, right? So there are a bunch of short and long videos in where you can, see a bunch of stuff related into, the exam itself or a particular technology. Also, a new initiative, actually, which is a recent initiative, which is 30 days to learn it, is something that Microsoft walked through a whole preparation for a particular learning path. In this case, Azure Data Engineering is available, so you have a 30 days to learn, and it's going to be challenging you with different questions and situation in where you have to pass it. I found it really interesting and something to really give it a try. Not only again for Azure SQL Data Engineering, you also have Azure Data Engineering, but also there are many other topics. The resources that Azure SQL provides to the community. One of them, right, is the YouTube channel, which is also available in Learn TV and Channel 9, right? So, but the YouTube channels for Azure SQL, they provide a ton of materials, videos on how to work on a particular technology. There is one that I love a lot. It's a series of 61 short videos, 3 to 5 minutes each, in where Anna Hoffman and Bob Ward are going from zero to expert to all the points in Azure SQL for SQL Server, database, Azure SQL Database, and Managed Instance. There is also the podcast Data Expose, which is, and there are several editions. One is MVP edition, one is Azure SQL edition. So Anna Hoffman has this, and you can watch it live or record it. And there are several professionals, data community professionals, focusing on certain technologies, areas, solution that you can see in this Data Exposed podcast, right? There is also a section in where they just show and share all the updates in the Azure Data Platform. And finally, to close up, I give you a couple of QR with links to the official data. Don't worry on getting this. As soon as we finish the presentation, I will put it into my GitHub repository and check out my Twitter, and you will be able to download the whole presentation, right? What's new in SQL Server 2019? Azure SQL Fundamentals, right? The whole training and documentation for this. If you want to focus on DP 900, definitely a good resource. The preparation guide for DP 300. This is the small QR that it was there before. And that's it. I'm not sure if we have a few minutes for questions. If we don't, you can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn, my email, and I will be happy to have contact with you. Thank you so much. Check my Twitter in the next few minutes, and you will have this presentation for you. So thank you again. Thank you, Julian, for the opportunity, and well, keep enjoying this this certification Saturday.